In a galaxy filled with legends of hope and heroism, it's easy to forget one brutal truth. The villains didn't just rise, they won. From Clone Wars to the fall of the New Republic, these are the stories the heroes tried to bury, the battles where evil triumphed, and today we uncover them all. Welcome to Inspired Theories. This is the definitive breakdown of the darkest victories in Star Wars history, battles the bad guys won, and the galaxy never recovered.
What happens when the galaxy's most brilliant strategist is pitted against its most elusive rebel leader, and both respect each other too much to kill outright? The answer lies buried beneath the ashes of a forgotten world and a forgotten rebellion smothered in silence. It's a story of mind games, moral dilemmas, and political carnage hidden under the Empire's iron grip. This is the untold history of the Battle of Batonn. Before the first Star Destroyer darkened Batonn's skies, one man had already set the galaxy trembling. He called himself Night Swan, a phantom of the Outer Rim. Night Swan waged an insurgent campaign unlike anything the Empire had seen, striking Iridium and Tibanna shipments, disrupting slave routes, inciting uprisings on Umbara, Cypher, Dinesh, and Samun. His tactics were calculated chaos, and all of it pointed to one ultimate target: the Empire's future superweapon, the Death Star, whose resources he'd clearly traced. But what Night Swan didn't anticipate was that his game would draw the attention of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn, then newly risen through the ranks with the help of Eli Vanto and ISB allies like Wolf Yularen, followed the breadcrumbs. Together, they exposed Night Swan's links to the Higher Skies advocacy group and tracked insurgent networks across the stars. What began as a cat and mouse chase evolved into something more profound: an ideological duel between two men who saw the flaws in the Empire but took radically different paths to change it. When Night Swan sparked open revolt on the planet Batonn, Thrawn knew this wasn't just another skirmish. This was the final move on the board. But why Batonn? And why now? 300 kilometers from Batonn's main continent lies Scrim Island, a strategic outpost with a small garrison and critical energy defences. Night Swan's forces stormed the island, taking over the deflector shields, ion cannons, and shoreline defences. They captured over 100 Imperial hostages, including engineers and civilians. It was a masterstroke of insurgent control. In response, Fleet Admiral Jock Danasius assembled top brass: Thrawn, Vanto, Tarkin, Yularen, and more, to plot retaliation. When Thrawn suggested patience and study, Danasius dismissed him, handling the mission directly to Admiral Jurel and his 103rd Task Force. That decision would cost the Empire dearly. Jurel's approach was brute force. He launched TIE fighters, ordered orbital bombardments, and tried to overpower the shields with sheer firepower. But Night Swan anticipated every move, lowering shields only to fire, then cloaking the island again. His forces immobilized Jurel's cruisers with ion fire and even damaged the Judicator's superstructure. But from the shadows, another player was watching. Thrawn and Vanto, posing as smugglers aboard their freighter, Slipknot, observed everything. While the Judicator burned, they infiltrated rebel lines. made contact with Night Swan, and extracted priceless intelligence on insurgent movements, proving once again that information, not firepower, wins wars. But what would Thrawn do with that knowledge? And why did he let Night Swan walk free? Once Dionysius saw the cost of Jorial's failure, he begrudgingly turned the reins over to Thrawn, now commanding the Chimera and his 96th Task Force. Thrawn set in motion a brilliant counter-offensive. He wanted the rebels to think his cruisers were vulnerable. Thrawn ordered the Shirak, Flenser, and Tumnor into low orbit, right in range of the island's ion cannons. Predictably, the insurgents fired, disabling the ship's primary drives and weapons. But unknown to them, the cruiser's auxiliary systems and communications were untouched. Using the cruisers as cover, Thrawn directed the Chimera to bombard the surrounding ocean, unleashing towering tidal waves that crashed into Scrim Island. Water overwhelmed rebel cannons and fortifications, forcing the insurgents to surrender and release the hostages. It was genius. But Thrawn was already looking past Scrim Island. He knew the real fight, the true siege, was waiting at Creekpat. With the island reclaimed, Thrawn traced Night Swan's freighters to the Creekpat mining and refining complex, a massive facility near the city, protected by a DSS-02 deflector shield and nestled beneath tons of rock and metal. It was now home to Night Swan's last stand, and thousands of civilians sympathetic to his cause. Surrounded but not yet broken, the complex was a powder keg. Thrawn sought a way to end the siege without mass civilian casualties, but Imperial politics made that near impossible. Governor Price, seeking to rescue her parents trapped inside, struck a deal with ISB. She and Agent Gudry would infiltrate the mine, gather intel, and plant explosives on the shield generator. Meanwhile, Thrawn deployed damaged cruisers again, this time arranged in orbit as part of a subtle trap. Surrounded by repair barges, they appeared vulnerable, but those barrages were secretly filled with TIE fighters loaned by Admiral Jorial, ready to spring the trap on any incoming rebel reinforcements. Still, Thrawn wasn't finished playing chess. He contacted Night Swan for one last meeting. In a secluded field near Creekpat, the two rivals met, not as enemies, but as men trying to understand each other. Thrawn explained the stakes beyond the Empire, speaking of chaos in the unknown regions, dangers that only strong galactic order could repel. He offered Night Swan a position among the Chiss Ascendancy, a future away from bloodshed, but Night Swan declined. He wouldn't leave his followers. He couldn't trust Governor Restos, and above all, he couldn't abandon the hope of a free galaxy. They parted with mutual respect, but no peace. The final strike began. Back inside the mine, Price and Gudry clashed. Gudry, unaware of Thrawn's private instructions, threatened Price, demanding she abandon her family. In a brutal fight, Price killed Gudry and fled with her parents. But outside, Thrawn assumed Gudry was still alive. He ordered a small squad to extract him, while using diversionary fire to draw out rebel forces. That's when Night Swan's fleet arrived, 30 ships strong, descending to finish Thrawn's crippled cruisers. Thrawn sprang his trap. TIE fighters erupted from the repair barges. Chimera's turbo lasers tore into rebel ships. In minutes, the rebel fleet was in retreat. Then, the real devastation came. Price, realizing Gudry was dead, and unwilling to risk ISB uncovering her involvement, remotely triggered the charges he'd planted. The explosion consumed the entire mining complex. Rebels, civilians, and Night Swan alike. The Empire called it a victory. Thrawn called it a tragedy. The Battle of Batonn cemented Thrawn's rise to power, and Governor Price's. But beneath the medals and commendations, the victory left scars. Thousands died, potential peace was lost, and Night Swan, a rebel leader who might have changed the galaxy, was forgotten by history. Only Thrawn remembered him. And perhaps that is the true lesson of Batonn. In a war of ideals, the greatest cost is not the lives lost, but the futures we choose not to save. How could a single battle destroy the legacy of dozens of Jedi and forge a darker path for the Chosen One? What happened on a forgotten mudball of a planet that led to the betrayal, sacrifice, and a decision that would haunt Anakin Skywalker for the rest of his life? The Siege of Jabiim wasn't just a loss, it was a disaster of such magnitude that the Republic tried to bury it. The Jedi tried to forget it, and the people of Jabiim never forgave it. What began as routine liberation spiraled into catastrophe, a brutal campaign drenched in mud, betrayal, and blood. But to understand why the Clone Wars was brought their worst to Jabiim, we must first ask, why did the Republic ignore Jabiim until it was already too late? In the early days of the Clone Wars, Jabiim was barely a footnote in the halls of the Galactic Senate. The planet's acidic rains, unstable terrain, and isolation made it strategically undesirable, and yet beneath the mud lay ore-rich veins, valuable enough to draw separatist interest. The Republic's delay in intervening led to a deadly outcome, a violent coup. Under the guidance of Count Dooku, a charismatic warlord named Alto Stratus orchestrated a purge of the pro-Republic Jabiimi Congress. Loyalist politicians were hunted and executed, their bodies left to rot in the acidic bogs. The survivors, few as they were, regrouped under Captain Orlis Gilman, a brave but outnumbered officer who pleaded for aid. The Alderaanian Diplomatic Corps attempted negotiations, but their efforts were ignored by the separatist-controlled Congress. The Republic knew they were losing the world, and perhaps, even worse, its rich mining infrastructure. In response, a task force was stationed on Handooin, ready to strike at a moment's notice. According to the Republic's intelligence reports, not only had the Separatists funded the coup, they had fully armed the new Jabiimi nationalist government. But the real reason Jabiim mattered was because it became the crucible of Jedi failure, and Obi-Wan Kenobi would lead the charge straight into it. The invasion launched in 22 BBY, with General Obi-Wan Kenobi assigned as theatre commander. The initial assault went well. Republic forces captured Camp Aurek, Point Down, and Outpost Shere, securing key high ground positions despite the treacherous terrain and relentless rain. But it was a false victory. The Republic had spread itself too thin. Alto Stratus, knowing the terrain better than anyone, launched a swift counterattack, striking Shelter Base, the Republic's primary fallback zone. In the chaos, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Alpha 17 were presumed dead. HoloNet News briefly reported the Jedi Master's death, though his fate remained unknown to Anakin. With command severed, the clones and Jedi were thrown into disarray. Republic forces fell back to the planet's southern hemisphere. desperately regrouping under the constant onslaught of mud, thunder, and separatist artillery. And it was then that a group of children would take up the torch. With Kenobi gone and many generals slain, a cadre of young Jedi Padawans, barely teenagers, took up command, led unofficially by Anakin Skywalker. They became known as the Padawan Pack. Jedi like Mac Lothar, Chuku Dune, Tbolton, Zul Sis, and others found themselves leading clone battalions in one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war. Some were seasoned for their age, others had never seen battle. None were ready for what came next. In the Battle of Cobalt Station, the Padawan Pack fought to delay separatist forces long enough for the Republic to evacuate what few they could. They held the line for days, burying brothers in the mud while rationing ammunition and medical supplies. One by one, they fell. Some were shot down, others were crushed beneath war droids. Zul Sis, one of the last standing, lost an arm but continued fighting until her blade burned out. In the end, only Anakin Skywalker remained. Command offered him a simple order: evacuate. But evacuation meant leaving the Jabiimi loyalists, the very people the Republic had sworn to protect. And so Skywalker made the choice that would haunt him forever. As the last transports ascended through the lightning-choked skies of Jabiim, Anakin Skywalker stood at the crossroads, literally and morally. The Republic had limited ships, and only the surviving clone troopers and Jedi could be evacuated. The Jabiimi loyalists, who had bled beside the Republic for every inch of mud-soaked terrain, were left behind. Anakin wanted to stay. He wanted to fight, but High Command overruled him. In the end, Anakin Skywalker boarded the last shuttle under protest, staring down through the viewport as the acidic rain engulfed what remained of Cobalt Station and its defenders. As the ships vanished into the stormy sky, Orlis Gilmun and his remaining soldiers realized the truth. They had been abandoned. For Anakin, it was more than a tactical withdrawal. It was a personal failure, one that began to crack his already fragile faith in the Jedi Council's leadership. The seeds of doubt, of betrayal, were firmly planted in his soul that day. But the war wasn't over for the Jabiimi. In the aftermath of the Republic's retreat, the Jabiimi nationalists under Altostratus' successor hunted down loyalist survivors, but Captain Ormus Gilmun refused to surrender. Rallying the remaining loyalists, he led a desperate underground resistance, planning a counterattack on the CIS command center in Hyber Canyon. It was a suicide mission, but one that nearly succeeded. Yet, in a brutal twist, Gilmun was assassinated by Torn Crane, a nationalist infiltrator, during a massacre at High Rock Canyon. Stabbed through the ribs with a vibroblade, Orlis died not as a general or soldier, but as the symbol for betrayal, murdered by his own people. His brother, Nolan Gilmun, survived the massacre and escaped into the wilderness, continuing to lead the loyalist remnants. The Republic would not return to Jabiim for another year, and when they did, it wasn't for liberation, it was for conquest. In 20 BBY, during the brutal final stretch of the Clone Wars, known as the Outer Rim Sieges, the Republic returned to Jabiim. But this time, there were no negotiations, no diplomacy, only war. The battle was costly. Republic legions faced off against entrenched separatist holdouts, fortified bunkers, and the same acidic weather that had destroyed them years prior. But the Republic pushed through, driven by desperation and the need to destroy the foundry of the Confederacy, a network of industrial worlds that Jabiim supported alongside Boz Pity, Felucia, and Seleucami. This time, the Republic won, but was it really a victory? Jabiim was left broken, its mines stripped, its population divided, and its cities scarred by constant orbital bombardments. With the fall of the Confederacy, Jabiim was absorbed into the Galactic Empire, and in a twist of cruel irony, the very Jabiimi nationalists who had once pledged themselves to Dooku's cause now swore fealty to Emperor Palpatine. The loyalists who had once dreamed of freedom were labelled traitors. In the archives of the Jedi Temple, Jabiim is barely mentioned, a footnote in a war filled with horrors. But for those who were there, for Anakin, for the clones, for the doomed Padawan pack, Jabiim was more than a defeat. It was a lesson in the cost of leadership. The Jedi's code of non-attachment was tested, broken, and discarded in the mud. Anakin Skywalker learned something else that day too. The Jedi would sacrifice anyone to win. That belief would fester and later help justify his fall to the dark side. After all, if the Jedi could abandon Jabiim, what else were they willing to throw away? The Siege of Jabiim remains one of the bloodiest and most tragic battles in the Clone Wars. It was a planetary quagmire, political, moral, and military. A place where heroes died without recognition, where children led armies, where the Republic's ideals drowned in the rain. And perhaps, most painfully, it was a place where the Jedi lost more than lives. They lost the trust of those they swore to protect. And so we ask again, what do you do when the order you fight for leaves you behind? Because on Jabiim, everyone was left behind. What happens when a world built beneath the oceans becomes a battlefield? Cala is one of the most majestic aquatic worlds in the galaxy, with bioluminescent cities nestled deep beneath swirling oceans and a civilization divided between two proud species, the elegant Mon Calamari and the pragmatic Quarren. The planet was a jewel of the Mid-Rim. Its people were master shipbuilders, political idealists, and defenders of freedom. But what happens when a divided people face the storm of war? What happens when galactic powers, first the Separatists, then the Empire, decide that Mon Cala is too valuable to remain free? This is the story of how Mon Cala fell, and how, even in the depths, it dared to rise again. 2 years into the Clone Wars, chaos had reached the Mid-Rim. General Grievous swept through hyperspace lanes like a plague, capturing systems with ruthless efficiency. Mon Cala, a vital source of starship technology and home to key trade routes, was in his sights. But he didn't strike with droids alone. First, Count Dooku struck with something more insidious: politics. The 82nd King of Mon Cala, Yos Kalina, was murdered in secret. An assassination designed to fracture the already fragile alliance between the Mon Calamari and the Quarren, with his son, Prince Lee Chair, next in line to rule. Hope remained. But what happened when a kingdom must follow a child? The Quarren, led by Nasser Ree, rejected Lee Chair's leadership. They saw in him inexperience, naivety, and weakness. That was exactly what Count Dooku needed. He dispatched Commander Riff Tamson, a brutal, shark-like Carcharodon, to ensure the divide grew violent. The civil war began with a Quarren betrayal. As Mon Cala's militia stood watchful in Coral City, the Quarren launched a surprise assault. Backed by separatist AQ series battle droids, they flooded the capital with overwhelming force. The Mon Calamari defenders faltered, but they were not alone. From the stars came Jedi Master Kit Fisto, Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, and Padme Amidala. Clone scuba troopers reinforced the battered Mon Cala ranks, driving back to Quarren in a bloody counterattack. But the war had only just begun. Tamsin escalated the conflict by unleashing a monstrosity from the depths, the Hydroid Medusa, a cybernetic jellyfish immune to blasters and lightsabers alike. The Mon Calamari were slaughtered in waves. Prince Lee Chair ordered a retreat to underwater caves. Then came the order that changed everything. Dooku commanded Tamsin to enslave the population. Camps were erected, and Mon Cala's people were rounded up. Even Nosiri, who had allied with the Separatists, began to question what he had invited into his world. Desperate, Lee Chair and his allies tried to escape aboard Padme's diplomatic starship, but Tamsin was already there. The ship was destroyed. The prince split off from his Jedi protectors and went into hiding. But in a galaxy where heroes come from unlikely places, salvation arrived not from the Jedi, but from Naboo. Jar Jar Binks, of all people, contacted the Gungan High Council, and Grand Boss Leone sent the Gungan Grand Army to aid Mon Cala. Can an underwater war be won by creatures from the swamps? Gungan reinforcements descended into the oceans, fighting back Tamsin's legions. Skywalker struck back, destroying a planetary scanner masked to misdirect Separatist forces. Still, Tamsin was relentless, using Trident-class assault ships to isolate and capture Jedi and clones alike. Only Ahsoka and Lee Chair remained free, but hope was not lost. Lee Chair realised that if Mon Cala was to survive, its people, Quarren and Mon Calamari, must stand together. He snuck into the internment camps and freed his captured allies. A full-scale revolt erupted. Nosiri, disillusioned and betrayed, confronted Tamsin, only to learn the truth. Tamsin intended to claim the throne for himself through Dooku's blessing. At the palace, Tamsin demanded Lee Chair's surrender. Instead, the young prince denounced him. Tamsin ordered his execution, but in a final twist of fate, Nosiri intervened. He betrayed Tamsin, turning Quarren troops against the Separatists. A united Mon Cala struck back in a final, desperate battle. Lee Chair and Tamsin clashed in a duel of fists, teeth, and blades. The prince, now a warrior king, plunged an explosive knife into Tamsin's neck, decapitating the butcher of Mon Cala. The battle was over, Lee Chair was crowned, and for a time, peace returned. But peace is never permanent. After the Republic became the Empire, Mon Cala once again stood at a crossroads. Lee Chair ruled a proud people, but under Imperial rule, pride was dangerous. Moff Willof Tarkin arrived aboard the Sovereign to negotiate. The deal: Mon Cala would provide Kelpite Strandbeam at a reduced cost and allow Imperial garrisons on their world. Lee Chair refused. Whispers spread of a hidden Jedi among Mon Cala's advisors, Ferren Barr, a survivor of Order 66, and he was no peacekeeper. Darth Vader was sent to investigate. As Tarkin's ambassador departed, his shuttle exploded. Sabotage. Vader interpreted it as an act of war. Troopers descended, and Lee Chair warned Barr. The Empire was coming. Akbar and Raddus, both admirals now, scrambled to organise resistance. Lee Chair sought a ceasefire. Tarkin refused. Mon Cala was already labelled a traitor world. As the battle began, massive sea creatures unleashed tidal destruction on Imperial units, but Vader and the Inquisitors pressed on, cutting through Mon Cala defenders and breaching the royal palace. Akbar led a bold attack on Colonel Bergen's floating platform, destroying the Imperial installation, but even with victories, the tide was turning. Tarkin planned a devastating blow. Raddus, in a stroke of genius, had the Mon Cala mercantile fleet link its shields into one massive barrier, protecting the cities below. Tarkin's Star Destroyers opened fire, but the shield held. Meanwhile, Vader tracked Ferren Bar to a cave in Bell City. As purge troopers surrounded Bar and his surviving acolyte, Verla, the Jedi activated their inhibitor chips, triggering Order 66. The troopers turned on the Inquisitors, killing the 10th brother. Bar and Verla escaped, but the endgame had begun. Surrender was no longer enough. Vader stormed the Royal Commander bunker. He captured Lee Char and dragged him to the window, forcing him to watch as Tarkin ordered an orbital bombardment of the Northern Hemisphere. Zeran town was obliterated. Bar confronted Vader one last time. In a fierce duel beneath the waves, he revealed the truth. He had sabotaged the Ambassador's shuttle. He had started the war, hoping to ignite galactic resistance. Vader killed Bar. The Jedi's spark was extinguished. Lee Char surrendered, but Tarkin didn't care. The southern hemisphere was bombarded anyway. Raddus launched a final escape attempt. 3 cruisers pierced the blockade. 2 were destroyed. Lee Char was taken. Mon Cala was broken. But in the darkness, a seed had been planted. The Mon Calamari would rise again, as rebel shipwrights, admirals and warriors. Akbar and Raddus, the MC-75 and the Home One. Vader thought Mon Cala was finished, but he was wrong. What if one of the bloodiest, coldest, and most politically charged battles of the entire Clone Wars wasn't just about defeating the Separatists, but was actually orchestrated to fuel the future of the Death Star? Beneath the frozen skies of Mygeeto, amid ash, sleet, and shattered Durasteel, the Republic and Confederacy clashed for 2 grueling years. But behind the chaos and the noble Jedi leadership, something darker was playing out. One of Palpatine's most covert plans was already underway, right under the Jedi's feet. So how did Mygeeto go from a financial stronghold of the galaxy to a broken monument of betrayal? And why was it so important to both sides that multiple Jedi generals were sent to their deaths to claim it? Let's uncover the secrets of the fall of Mygeeto. Why was Mygeeto such a key battleground in the Clone Wars? The answer begins with power, not just military, but economic. Mygeeto, a glacial fortress world located in the Albario system of the Outer Rim, was the frigid jewel of the intergalactic banking clan. This mutant-controlled world was a cityscape of crystalline towers and Durasteel spires, with technology and wealth interwoven into its very ice. When war erupted, the IGBC joined the Confederacy of Independent Systems, lending not just droid battalions, but financial muscle to the separatist cause. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine himself designated Mygeeto as part of the Triad of Evil, alongside Felucia and Seleucumai, making it as a critical separatist stronghold to be neutralized at any cost. But here's the question: was it about ending the separatists, or stealing from them? What secret was Palpatine really hiding beneath the surface of Mygeeto? While the Republic war machine mobilized its elite troopers, including the Galactic Marines under Commander Bakara and Jedi General Ki-Adi-Mundi, a shadow mission was also in motion. In 19 BBY, just before Order 66, the Republic deployed elements of the 501st Legion to Mygeeto. Officially, their mission was to assist in destroying a separatist droid energy collector. But that wasn't the real target. In truth, Palpatine had dispatched the 501st to secure a mysterious experimental power source hidden beneath the energy facility. This power source was vital to Project Hammerton, a top-secret tributary laser stream intended to be used in the construction of the Death Star super laser. As confirmed in 2005's Star Wars Battlefront 2 and supplemental Legends material, the 501st retrieved the power core and sent it directly to Coruscant. Palpatine's endgame was already unfolding, even before the Clone Wars officially ended. But while the elite forces searched for hidden tech, the surface war was escalating into something far more tragic. How did Mygeeto become the icy grave of one of the Jedi Council's most respected members? By the time of the Fourth Battle of Mygeeto, the city world had become a nightmarish war zone of destroyed UT-80s, tri-droid bombardments, and broken clone lines. General Ki-Adi-Mundi, leading the 21st Nova Corps, marched his troops across a shattered bridge toward victory. Or so he thought, until the signal came. Order 66. On the command of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, Clone Marshal Commander Bacara and the Galactic Marines turned their blasters on Mundi. Despite his skills, the Jedi Master couldn't withstand the barrage. He fell amid the sleet, surrounded by soldiers he had trusted with his life. His death marked not just the end of his command, but the symbolic end of the Jedi's influence on Mygeeto. But this betrayal wasn't isolated. It was merely one scene in a wider symphony of deception, one that had begun years earlier with another Jedi team sent to this same cursed world. What did a young Padawan named Caleb Doom survive on Mygeeto that would haunt him forever? Before Ki-Adi-Mundi's death, the Republic had already launched major operations against Mygeeto's entrenched separatist forces. One such mission, now buried by time, saw Jedi Master Depa Billaba and her Padawan, Caleb Doom, later known as Kanan Jarrus, deployed to clear the southern mesas of separatist droids in what would become the Third Battle of Mygeeto. They faced overwhelming odds, B-1 battle droids in massive numbers, separatist Colonel Coburn Sayre, and even General Grievous himself. Republic forces were nearly overrun until Fen Rao's Skull Squadron arrived to save the day. But the real horror came later. Grievous and Sayre attacked the Jedi's Mesa camp directly. Sayre killed Clone Trooper Stance and wounded Billaba. Caleb managed to kill Sayre in a brutal duel, but the cost was personal. He was found crying over Stance's body, traumatized. The moment would shape the man he would become, and foreshadow the greater betrayals still to come. So what happened after the Jedi were all gone? What became of the cold wasteland they fought to protect? Why didn't the Empire just destroy Mygeeto like they did so many other CIS worlds? Because Palpatine needed it. After Order 66 and the rise of the Galactic Empire, Mygeeto fell swiftly under Imperial control. But unlike other separatist strongholds, the IGBC wasn't dismantled. It was absorbed. The Empire couldn't risk destabilizing the galactic economy by wiping out the banking clan. Instead, they enslaved the Mutants, strip-mined the planet, and used its icy infrastructure to fuel the growing war machine of the Empire. Brutal labour conditions led to mass Mutant casualties. The towering banks and crystal cities of Mygeeto became factories of suffering, and in a bitter twist of irony, the world that once funded war became a cog in the Empire's own military-industrial complex. Even decades later, Mygeeto continued to bleed. From trade wars, bounty hunter raids like Greedo's mission, and skirmishes with the Rebel Alliance, including Riot Squadron and the Plasma Devils, Mygeeto was never freed. It was never redeemed. It was left shattered. It was left as a shattered echo of Republic failure and Imperial greed. The fall of Mygeeto wasn't just a tragic chapter in the Clone Wars. It was a carefully orchestrated, multi-year campaign designed to eliminate the Jedi, seize advanced tech, and pave the way for the Empire. From the deaths of Ki-Adi-Mundi and Stance, to Caleb Dume's trauma, and the secret power source for the Death Star, Mygeeto was never just another battlefield. It was a crucible for the Republic's transformation into tyranny. And still, one question remains. How many more Clone Wars battles were actually fronts for Palpatine's grand design? And how many of the Jedi's so-called victories were already scripted to lead their own extinction? There was no formal declaration of battle, no planetary defense grid scrambling for contact, no rebel war council bracing for impact. The Battle of Derra 4 began, like so many events in the Star Wars saga, with a whisper, a shadow, a rumour carried across hyperspace lanes by smugglers and information brokers. But behind that whisper was a calculating mind whose name went unspoken in Imperial courts. Grand Admiral Thrawn. While Thrawn had already earned his title, one of the few non-humans to ever rise to such heights, his status among the upper echelons of the Imperial hierarchy remained tenuous. In the shadows of Corellia, Thrawn was working to dismantle the criminal organisation known as Black Sun, whose tendrils extended deep into arms trafficking. One of the freighters under Black Sun's loose control was the Hopskip, a ship that appeared at first glance to be carrying standard contraband, but Thrawn's mind saw patterns others overlooked. He deduced that Hopskip was bound for Derra 4, a world largely insignificant to the war, unless it served as a staging ground. Through this, Thrawn uncovered the secret. A massive rebel supply convoy was assembling at Derra 4, destined to reinforce a new, hidden rebel base in the Outer Rim. And so began the trap. Though Thrawn had orchestrated the operation, it was Darth Vader who brought it to the Emperor. The Sith Lord saw it as an opportunity, not just to cripple the rebellion's supply line, but to demonstrate to Palpatine that the fledgling alliance was always vulnerable to the precision of the Empire. The mission was assigned to the 181st Imperial Fighter Group, an elite TIE unit led by ace pilot Sunter Fel, alongside future legends like Turfinair and Aver Derracote. The plan called for the use of a Star Destroyer to pin the convoy, while waves of TIE interceptors and fighters overwhelmed the rebels before they could jump to lightspeed. Despite being a loyal servant to the Empire, Fel couldn't help but feel a bitter irony. The man behind the brilliance of this strategy was an alien, in a government that touted human high culture and rejected alien inclusion. Thrawn had to operate through others like Vader. His name, conspicuously absent from the Imperial briefing logs, Fel's disgust festered, but he followed orders. The ambush was swift, brutal, and absolute. As the rebel convoy departed Derra 4, thinking themselves clear of danger, the trap was sprung. Out of hyperspace came the Imperial Star Destroyer, its presence a cold, oppressive blade in space. Seconds later, TIE fighters screamed out of its hangars, squadrons of the 181st moving in tight formation, cutting through the first wave of transports with clinical precision. The rebels had Renegade Flight, a veteran unit from Red Squadron, acting as escort. Commander Nara, a rising star in the rebellion, did all he could to rally his pilots and defend the helpless transports. But the Empire had numbers, coordination, and Thrawn strategy behind them. The battle lasted mere minutes. Every rebel ship was destroyed, every fighter shot down. The once proud Renegade Flight was obliterated, and at the centre of it all, Soontir Fel personally took down Nara's X-Wing. There were no survivors. But how did such a one-sided massacre ripple across the rest of the galaxy? The consequences were catastrophic. Not just for those who died in orbit over Derra 4, but for those waiting at Echo Base on Hoth. The convoy had been carrying not just munitions, but engineers, medical supplies, and heavy weaponry. Everything Echo Base would have needed to become a true stronghold. Now they only had rogue flight, barely a skeleton crew left to defend them. And with Nara dead, Luke Skywalker was promoted to commander and placed in charge of what remained of Red Squadron, soon moulding it into the elite Rogue Squadron. That transformation would be necessary, because the Empire was not done. Back on Coruscant, the success of the operation was paraded before the Emperor. Finnair, Derra, and Fel were honoured personally by Palpatine. Finnair received a squadron command. Derra was promoted to general and given command of the Borlius installation. Fel, who had never wanted fame, was made a Baron of the Empire, given an estate on Corellia, and promoted to Colonel. But what of Thrawn? No mention, no credit, no honour. It's believed that Isan Izard, head of Imperial Intelligence, saw to Thrawn's reassignment to the unknown regions shortly thereafter. Was it out of envy, out of fear of what an alien Grand Admiral's fame might do to the Empire's ideology? Whatever the cause, Thrawn's brilliance was banished to the shadows, for a time. For the rebellion, the Battle of Derra 4 was more than just a defeat. It was a reckoning. The destruction of the convoy left the rebellion fractured and scrambling. With no time to properly fortify Hoth, General Rekan's words sum up the impact best. A huge force of TIE fighters jumped Commander Nara and the convoy off Derra 4, cut them to pieces. There were no survivors. And yet, Derra 4 would not be forgotten. Decades later, long after the fall of the Empire, Wedge Antilles, while a captive of the Second Galactic Empire on Coruscant in 40 ABY, attempted a simulation of the battle. He failed, again and again. A reminder that some moments in war are not meant to be won, only survived. In the years that followed, whispers of Thrawn's genius would become legend. His art of war, of analysing culture, art, and patterns, would redefine how the galaxy understood conflict. But on Derra 4, his genius went unseen, forgotten, buried beneath the wreckage of X-Wings and shattered freighters. And yet, it was this single battle, this massacre in the void, that shaped the final leg of the Galactic Civil War. It pushed Luke Skywalker forward as a leader. It exposed the Empire's willingness to use overwhelming force, and it sowed the seeds of resentment in men like Soontir Fel, who would one day turn against the Empire he once served. The price of silence was blood. What happens when a Jedi Council member is ordered to hunt down his own apprentice? What if the war pushed a Jedi too far, and her master had to choose between saving her or silencing her? Haruun Call was supposed to be a minor campaign, barely even a target in the Galactic War, but buried beneath the jungle and ash, the Republic found something far more dangerous than droids. A fallen Jedi Master, a warlord with the Force, and a war unlike any other. This is the Battle of Haruun Cala, a descent into madness, betrayal, and one of the darkest victories in Jedi history. At first glance, Haruun Cala was irrelevant. Tucked away in the mid-rim near the Yuuzhan reaches, its strategic value was practically non-existent. The planet was harsh, volcanic, toxic, with massive storms and dense jungles. But beneath the sulphur skies and seismic cliffs was something the Jedi Council couldn't ignore. The native Kuranai people were force sensitive. Not just a few, many. The Jedi believed they were descendants of a long-forgotten Jedi outpost, with latent force abilities that made them natural warriors. The Council feared that if the Separatists recruited these natives, especially with training, it could turn into a guerrilla nightmare. So the Jedi sent someone who could both connect with the Kuranai and survive the war zone. They sent Master Depa Billaba, a council member herself, and more importantly, Mace Windu's former Padawan. Depa's mission seemed successful at first. She trained Jedi-like militia called the Ak Guard, Kuranai warriors mounted on Ak dogs and trained to use the Force in battle. But as the local civil war, the so-called Summertime War, escalated between the native Kuranai and the city-dwelling Billawai, something changed in Depa. She disappeared from Republic communications. And then, a hollow recording emerged. It showed Depa brutally executing a prisoner, an unarmed Bilawi civilian. It wasn't a fake. It wasn't doctored. The Jedi Council was stunned. A council member had seemingly gone rogue, and so Mace Windu, her former master, was dispatched. But his orders were clear. Bring her back alive, if possible. If not, put her down. As Mace descended into the brutal jungles of Haruun Cala, he found more than droids and blasters. He found Kar Vastor, a massive primal warlord and force-sensitive leader of the Ak Guard. Vastor was not Sith, but something older, more tribal, more raw. Vastor was the living embodiment of jungle warfare. Strength, brutality, survival. He and Depa had bonded, philosophically and militarily. She had joined him, believing that the Republic's rules didn't apply to Haruun Cala's chaos. To defeat the Separatists and Bilawi, she had embraced violence and lost herself in it. In Mace's own words, he could feel the shatter point, the moment where her fate and the galaxy's would crack. She did not fall to the dark side. She dove. Meanwhile, the Bilawi militia, 15,000 strong, was led by Colonel Lors Gepton, a separatist-aligned tactician who tracked Mace's location using spy satellites that could trace his lightsaber's energy signature. Gepton's plan was brilliant and brutal. Drop Dakar missiles, essentially heavy-duty seismic bombs, right onto Mace's position, wiping out the Jedi and Vastor's warriors in one strike. At the same time, in orbit above the planet, the Republic cruiser Halleck arrived, only to be ambushed. Dozens of vulture droids hidden in orbit and camouflaged as debris activated and opened fire on the gunships. The battle became chaos. Clone troopers wearing repulsor packs leapt into the void, one shielding their transports from droid fire with their own bodies. Gunships exploded mid-drop. One turret gunner, 7-4, was ejected into open space, but still managed to shoot down the last droid starfighter with help from an RP trooper. Back on the surface, the jungle roared with war. Mace Windu had survived the Dukas. Vaster and Corunni unleashed beasts, Akdogs, Grasser stampedes, and even a mounted Ancox against Balawi turbostorm gunships and ground assault vehicles. But then, everything flipped. Mace, Vastor, and Depa commandeered 2 Balawi gunships and used them to fire on the droid starfighters. The droids' limited programming misinterpreted this. They now saw Balawi ships attacking them and turned on Gepton's own forces. Suddenly, the tide shifted. Clone troopers broke through and landed at Lorshan Pass. Mace revealed something stunning. This was the plan all along. Every move, every risk, meant to lure the enemy, bait their trap, and take the entire system. This is Mace Windu at his most strategic, combining force mastery, politics, and military timing into one precise moment. The final phase of the battle came at the capital city, Pelek Ba. Mace, Corunni fighters, and Republic troops stormed the city. They quickly took the spaceport and control bunker, but then, betrayal. Kar Vastor seized the command center and ordered attacks on Balawi civilians, trying to ignite full-blown genocide. Mace confronted him, racing to the Ministry of Justice to find Lord Gepton and deactivate the droid fighter control systems. But Vastor wasn't done. Mace now had to face both his fallen apprentice and a brutal Force warlord at once. The final duel was brutal. Mace clashed with Kar Vastor in a battle of raw power versus precision. At the same time, Depa Billaba, tormented by her own guilt and madness, tried to end her own life. Nick Rostu, a Corunni soldier loyal to Mace, shot her lightsaber from her hand just in time. Mace managed to impale Kar Vastor with a vibro shield, ending his rampage, but the cost was devastating. Depa collapsed into a coma, Kar was arrested, and Mace, standing over a ruined city, heard Gepton ask, "Did we win?" Mace's reply was haunting. "I seem to be the last one standing." After the battle, Haruun Kal officially joined the Republic. Clone forces remained on planet to police both the Corunni and Balawi. Depa Bilaba's coma removed her from the Jedi Council, and her seat was filled by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kar Vastor was imprisoned in the Jedi Temple. Nick Rostu, now a hero, received the Medal of Valor and eventually led the 44th Division. But the scars of Haruun Kal ran deeper than reports could show. The war hadn't just broken the planet, it had broken a Jedi, one of their own. Years later, under the Empire, Haruun Kal would be bombed again, its Corunni population possibly wiped out completely. What does it say about the Jedi that one of their most powerful masters had to break every rule to save his apprentice? That a Jedi Council member could be consumed by war, not in a grand battle, but in a forgotten jungle? The Battle of Haruun Kal was not just a skirmish in the Clone Wars. It was the shatter point where the Jedi's illusions cracked, and the jungle swallowed them whole. Today, we uncover a lost chapter from the darkest days of the Yuuzhan-Vong War, where a poisoned world became a galactic symbol of defeat. What happens when the tide of war reaches the very heart of the galaxy? When a world, once written off as a polluted wasteland, becomes the key to saving millions, and instead becomes the site of unspeakable devastation. This was Duro, a core world, a bastion of civilization, a glimmer of hope for the New Republic's refugee crisis, until the Yuuzhan-Vong arrived. Today, we unravel how a world rebuilt to save others was dragged screaming into fire, how a Jedi Knight killed a space serpent the size of a starfighter, and how the torture of Leia Organa Solo nearly fractured the galaxy's last hope. Why Duro? Why would the Yuuzhan-Vong, a species known for targeting symbols of strength and culture, target a polluted, largely abandoned core world? The answer lies in desperation and symbolism. By the time the war reached its third year, the New Republic was struggling to house the staggering number of refugees displaced by the Vong's brutal conquest of the Outer Rim and Midrim. Duro, long polluted and scarred by orbital industry, had become the site of a massive New Republic-led terraforming initiative. Floating cities in orbit hosted hundreds of thousands of displaced civilians, and environmental teams began the painstaking process of reconditioning the planet's atmosphere. But to the Yuuzhan-Vong, Duro represented something more: proof that the New Republic could adapt and fight back, a place where life was returning to a world that had been dead for decades. The Vong would not allow it. The attack was brutal and swift. The Vong deployed Dovan basils, bioengineered gravity-warping organisms, to rip Duro's floating cities from orbit and slam them into the toxic surface. Urdorf City, one of the largest orbital hubs, was the only hub to escape intact, fleeing with thousands of civilians. The rest were obliterated, vaporized upon impact. And that wasn't all. The Yuuzhan-Vong had brought with them beasts. The Ichna, a colossal space serpent capable of wrapping itself around entire city platforms, and two Skart and Skaru, twin serpentine war monsters that tore through defences with biological weaponry fused into their bodies. The floating city of Or-Om fell victim to the Ichna. It might have been annihilated completely had it not been for Anakin Solo. In a moment of daring that echoed the heroism of Luke Skywalker at the Death Star, Anakin Solo, only 16 years old, piloted his starfighter directly toward the gaping maw of the Ichna. He fired a single proton torpedo right down its throat. The explosion tore the beast apart from the inside, but even Anakin's victory couldn't stop the inevitable. Duro was lost, and far worse things were about to happen on the ground. Leia had been on Duro during the assault, overseeing humanitarian efforts and helping evacuate refugees. She was captured by War Master Savong La, the most fanatical of the Vong leaders, a zealot devoted to the god of war, Yun Yamka. La tortured her to the brink of death, preparing to offer her as living sacrifice to his god. But La had not expected Jacen Solo, the young Jedi who had withdrawn from the Force out of fear of violence and destiny, now faced a terrible choice: remain passive or let his mother die. Jacen chose the Force. Using a swirl of objects, Jacen summoned a telekinetic whirlwind, hurling La out a window and severing the War Master's foot. It was a moment that changed Jacen and the war forever. Humiliated, injured, and furious, Savong La issued a galactic proclamation. "Give us your Jedi." He claimed he would halt the invasion at Duro if the galaxy handed over every Jedi. It was a lie and a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Entire planets betrayed Jedi in hiding. Force sensitives were handed over out of fear or desperation. Even non-Jedi were mistaken for targets. In the words of Nash Choka, La's eventual successor, he squandered our war on the Jedi. Duro wasn't just a military loss. It marked the beginning of the Jedi Purge in the new Jedi Order era. The Battle of Duro showed the galaxy a terrible truth. Even the core was not safe. Even hope could be poisoned. Even heroes could be broken. But in its ashes, something else was born. Jacen Solo took his first steps toward a destiny that would shape the future of the Force. The Jedi learned that survival meant adaptation, and the war entered its darkest, bloodiest phase yet. The Battle of Duro was supposed to be a chance at salvation. Instead, it became a symbol of betrayal, trauma, and sacrifice. What other secrets lie buried in the Yuuzhan Vong War? And what did this battle foreshadow about the future of the Solo children? Officially, there never was a clone rebellion on Kamino. Unofficially, 20 years after they were created, the 501st Legion were sent to destroy the birthplace of the clone army and kill their brothers. How do you cover up a war that never officially happened? How do you wipe clean the blood spilled by your own hand, when the hand pulling the trigger looks exactly like the one falling to the ground? In 12 BBY, the Galactic Empire deployed the 501st Legion to Kamino, the very world that birthed the Grand Army of the Republic, to crush a rebellion grown not by separatists or Jedi, but by the Kaminoans themselves. In secret, they had begun producing a new generation of Fett clones, not for the Empire, but against it. This is the untold story of betrayal, brotherhood, and the day Kamino nearly broke the Empire from within. Today we dive deep into the Battle of Kamino, the clone uprising that Palpatine tried to erase from the archives of history. Lama Su, the Prime Minister of Kamino, said, "So Palpatine has a new army. I have no doubt he'll find our cloning operations a threat one day soon." After the execution of Order 66, Kamino was no longer the heart of the Republic's war machine. It became the prison of its legacy. Under the newly formed Empire, Kamino fell under strict surveillance. Though the Empire relied on the Kaminoan cloning technology to sustain its ranks, the loyalty between client and contractor had decayed. The Empire believed the Kaminoans were subservient, but behind the glossy walls of Tapoka City, a rogue sect of Kaminoan scientists, known as the Clone Masters, had other plans. they did not hand over all of Jango Fett's DNA. Resentful of Palpatine's control and disillusioned with the Empire's cold bureaucracy, the Clone Masters initiated a secret project, an anti-Imperial clone army, grown in secret beneath the very waves of Tipoca City. These new clones were loyal to Kamino, not the Empire, and like their predecessors, they were grown from the DNA of Jango Fett. Equipped with Phase 1 armour and highly trained as jet troopers and rail arc commandos, this new generation of soldiers was not an echo of the past. They were a rebellion in the making. But why return to older gear and armour? The Phase 1 design was a symbolic rejection of Imperial standardization and a callback to the purity of the original clone brotherhood, one untouched by the Empire's tampering. The insurrection didn't come from separatists or Jedi remnants. It came from within the clone legacy itself. When word of the Uprising reached Emperor Palpatine, he did not send a Jedi. He did not even send a Grand Moff. He sent the 501st. And leading the charge was someone who knew the facility better than any Imperial officer, Boba Fett. A clone himself, unaltered and trained under his father, Jango, Boba had grown up walking the halls of Tipoca City. Now he would return to burn it to the ground. Deployed via Sentinel-class landing craft, the 501st launched a full-scale invasion of Kamino. Stormtroopers, many of whom were Fett cloned themselves, descended on the platforms of Tipoca City to fight what was, quite literally, their own reflection. The battle wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Clones faced off against clones. Brothers turned rifles on brothers. While stormtroopers fought across the city's outer platforms, Boba Fett slipped into the depths of the cloning facility. His first target, the door control consoles that kept the cloning chambers locked down. Once inside, Fett eliminated the facility's security and retrieved the last known viable sample of Jango Fett's DNA template. With the DNA recovered, Fett delivered it to the landing craft for extraction, but his mission was not over. Fett re-entered the facility and executed a critical strike on Kamino's cloning infrastructure, destroying the life support systems in the lower levels, effectively murdering the next generation of anti-Imperial clones before they could even take their first breath. This was not war, it was sterilization, an erasure of resistance before it could become memory. Outside, the battle raged. The rogue Kaminoan clones made their final stand on the landing platforms, jetpacks igniting against the blaster fire and TIE fighters strafing runs. As the anti-Imperial forces were driven back, the Kaminoan leadership attempted to escape in 2 low-altitude assault transports, but Imperial shock troopers were ready. With well-timed rocket fire and turret bombardments, both ships were blasted from the sky, taking the resistance leaders with them into the Kaminoan seas. The uprising was over. Tipoca City remained in Imperial hands, but the cost of victory was never recorded. Officially, there was no battle. The Empire, having crushed the uprising, responded with swift policy changes. Emperor Palpatine ordered a complete overhaul of the Imperial cloning program. No longer would the Empire rely solely on the Jango Fett template. Henceforth, stormtroopers would be cloned from a variety of genetic templates, and eventually replaced by birth-born conscripts. The move diversified the Imperial army, but fractured its unity. The 501st remained pure, but as one clone wrote, "We never really got used to the new guys." Most of the surviving Kaminoan leaders were imprisoned on the Death Star. During the Death Star uprising, many would die, fighting beside captured rebel prisoners. Their rebellion had failed, but their message echoed across time. Even the clones could say no. The Battle of Kamino is one of the most tragic stories in all of Star Wars Legends. A tale not of rebellion, but of identity. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about Jedi. It was about who the clones truly were when the war was over. When the orders were gone. When loyalty conflicted with conscience. And for the Empire, it was a message too dangerous to let survive. What if the Kamino Uprising had been successful? What if the Empire had not been undone by rebels or Jedi, but by the very army it built? But what do you think? Should the Empire ever have moved away from the clones? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, like, subscribe and join us next week for another deep dive into the archives. If you are enjoying the videos, become a member and let's uncover the galaxy's biggest secrets together. Thanks for watching.